Hi Bianca. So our new lesson for today is going to be about properties of multiplication. So these are just kind of like rules that we use when we're multiplying and different strategies almost that can be used to multiply numbers in different ways. So it's actually going to be 2 pages. Your date is going to be the 31st. Properties of multiplication is going to be your title. And then it's 2 pages. So for me, it's 16 and 17. So the first page is notes that's actually typed up for you. And then the second page is going to be like a practice page of different questions involving different properties. So write this down. If you need to pause, you can pause now. I'm going to go ahead and flip to the page that I need to be at. So this, is what your first page is going to look like. So we're just going to go through them. I'm just going to read through them and kind of give you an example so that you understand it rather than just looking at it and not having any context. So the first one is called the commutative property of multiplication. Some of them are kind of tricky to say. It's almost like if you think of the word community, it's like together, and even though things are in a certain order, it doesn't mean that you'll get a different number. So in a community, you have many different parts, but the product is always the same. It's one community. So it says when we switch the order of the factors, we get the same product. So here there's an example where we're using variables. So A times B is the same thing as B times A. Order doesn't matter when we multiply. So an example is 3 times 2 is the same thing as 2 times 3. So you would get a product of 6 for both sides. Our second one is called the identity property of multiplication. This one you're familiar with even if you didn't know that it had a name. So this means that the product of a number and 1 is always the number itself. So A times 1 will always give you A. As an example, 7 times 1 always will give you 7. Okay, our next example, again, you knew this before even though you didn't maybe know that it had a name. It's called the zero property of multiplication. This means that the product of any number in 0 is always 0. So A times 0 equals 0. Your example is 4 times 0 equals 0. Okay, let's see if I can continue moving up and stay on the screen. Perfect. So these next two are a little bit more complex. They're more kind of like multi-step. So this one is the associative property of multiplication. When we group factors differently, we get the same product. So if you have numbers, kind of like the same as the commutative property, the order doesn't matter. So if you want to multiply 2 numbers first and then the third one, if it makes more sense in your head, you can change the order or change the grouping, and that won't change the product. So in every example, we have 3 times 4 times 2, 3 times 4 times 2, but if we have parentheses under certain ones or next to certain ones, that doesn't change your product because in the end, you're multiplying them all together. The step or the order in which you multiply them together doesn't matter. So if we do 3 times 4, that would give us 12 and 24. Here we can do 4 times 2 first to get 8 times 3, 24. So we'll get the same answer no matter which ones we do first. That's the associative property. They are sometimes going to be grouped using parentheses. And then our last one is the distributive property of multiplication. This says when we multiply a number by the sum of or difference between 2 numbers using parentheses, we can distribute the number to each number inside the parentheses. That sounds like a little bit confusing. However, it just means that you can factor out a number that's common between the two that you're either adding or subtracting, and that will give you the same answer. So for this example, we have 3 on the outside and 5 plus 4. We can distribute the 3, meaning we can do 3 times 5 and add that to 3 times 4. So that would give us 15 plus 12 or 27. That gives us the same answer if we do 5 plus 4 first for 9 times 3, 27. Same thing for the next example. So we have 4 on the outside and we have subtraction. So the big thing you have to pay attention to here is the addition or subtraction. So here we're going to multiply 4 times 5 first and then add our subtraction sign and then do 4 times 2. So that would give us 20 minus 8 or 12 or 5 minus 2 is 3, times 4 is 12. So both give us the same answer, no matter if we distribute a factor out, or if we factor a number out, or distribute it to each of the numbers inside the parentheses. So now we're gonna look at some of the examples on the practice page. So these look at many different of the properties, not all distributive or all commutative. They're all kind of mixed together. So one big thing you can think about is which numbers should we group together so that it is easier to mentally multiply or to multiply in our head. So this might vary person to person, and that's okay. Your grouping might be different than other people's. However, we know based on the properties we just talked about that order doesn't matter for the commutative property, and you can group numbers differently, like the associative property tells us. So for me, I'm pretty good with multiples of 10. So I'm gonna group these two together. 2 times 5 would give me 10. And then I'm gonna group the other two numbers together. 4 times 7 is 28. So then I'm left with 28 times 10. Remember, I can do 28 times 1 and add a 0. So that gives us 280. Pretty simple. So then the next one we're gonna do is one of the distributive property ones. I feel like we did this a little bit last year, but maybe not as much as we will this year. So we're gonna do D first. We know that 6 times the difference of 10 and 3, we can just do straight out like that, or we can distribute the 6 to each of these. So this is the same as 6 times 10. It's subtraction, so minus 6 times 3. So that would give me 60 minus 18, which would be 42. I can check by saying, okay, 10 minus 3 is 7, times 6 is 42. Okay, we're just gonna do one more together and then you'll do the rest independently. So this one gives us 8 times 12. We know that that would be the same thing as factoring out an 8 and multiplying it by 10 plus 2. That's the same as 12, which we also know is the same as distributing the 8 inside to both of these numbers. So we would first do 8 times 10. So our first blank is going to be an 8. Then we're adding 8 times 2. So for this, because the number that was factored out was 8, the number in both of our blanks will be 8. And this is the distributive property. Okay, so you're gonna go ahead and finish this worksheet independently. Remember, you can email and we can always set up another meeting if you have any questions. You're also going to do in your workbook pages 24 and 25. So here you just kind of go through and label which one they're using, which property, and then here you're solving. Okay, so it's page 24 and 25 in your workbook, and then to finish up this one. Bye, Bianca.